Let me ask you something. How did we go from space launches and electric cars to billionaires slapping each other across social media like high school dropouts in a TikTok feud? Trump is president again. Elon, his former golden boy, turned digital insurgent. Once allies, they threw money and memes at each other like frat bros at a crypto conference. Trump gave Elon political clout and even handed him the reins of a made-up government department. Doge. Yes, seriously. Elon pumped $200 million into his campaign. That's not a donation, that's an acquisition. Then, Elon called Trump's tax plan a disgusting abomination and openly suggested impeachment. Trump responded like every outdated king losing power does. He threatened to cut off Elon's companies from government contracts and called him crazy. Now, Tesla's market cap is crashing, SpaceX is in the political crosshairs, and we're watching what happens when political bromance turns into a digital divorce. Welcome to 2025, where American leadership is now indistinguishable from a YouTube boxing match. And here's the kicker. While the world laughs, our economy is collapsing under a mountain of debt built by the same morons you keep voting for. Yeah, that includes the financial genius currently cosplaying as your president. This isn't just a scandal, it's a symptom. We are deep in the big debt cycle. And if you think this chaos is random, think again. Today, we're diving headfirst into How Countries Go Broke, The Big Cycle by legendary investor Ray Dalio, a man who's made a career out of betting billions on when countries collapse and usually being right. Now, before we go any further, this video falls under the Fair Use Act. It's for educational purposes, it's transformative, and let's be honest, you're not reading 500 pages of economic history on your own. So sit down, shut up, and pay attention. We're about to make macroeconomics feel like a street fight. Ray Dalio isn't an ivory tower economist. He's a global macro investor, which means he doesn't just study how the world works, he bets billions of dollars on it. This guy has spent 50 plus years dissecting economies like a surgeon on a caffeine bender. He doesn't guess. He studies patterns, cycles, history, and then turns that into profit. In this book, Dalio asks questions like, can a country like the US, yes, with the world's reserve currency, go broke? What does that actually look like when it happens? And what can we learn from 500 years of other empires doing the exact same dumb shit we're doing now? Spoiler alert, the US isn't special, we're just next in line. Dalio breaks down what he calls the big cycle, a multi-decade pattern where countries rise, overdose on debt, collapse, and reset. Sound familiar? And guess what? We're at the collapse part. The empire is bloated, the debt is cancerous, the politics are tribal, the money printer is overheating. You can smell the end of an era in the air, but no one wants to say it. But I will. We're broke. We're just too arrogant to admit it. In this series, we'll break down the book chapter by chapter, not just summarizing, but challenging. We'll call out your illusions, we'll confront your blind spots, because understanding this book isn't optional if you want to survive what's coming. If you still believe politicians care about fiscal responsibility, or that central banks are neutral geniuses, or that printing money isn't theft from your future self, you're exactly the kind of person this book was written to wake up. Welcome to Mindful Reads Hub. Let's get started. The Debt Illusion: How Nations Sleepwalk into Financial Catastrophe. Imagine this. You're on a treadmill. The incline slowly increases. You're not paying attention because there's a TV in front of you playing TikToks of cats and billionaires arguing about pronouns. Meanwhile, the treadmill's speed doubles. You're still laughing at a video of Trump calling Musk Elon the alien. You don't notice you're sprinting until your knees buckle and you slam your face into the console. That's how the average country walks into a debt crisis. And we're sprinting, America. Let's get real. You think the government is just printing money to help you? No, they're trying to keep the music going while the dance floor is on fire. We're not in control of the machine. We are the machine. You, me, everyone else, gears in a giant economic illusion. And like every illusion, it works until it doesn't. Ray Dalio calls this the big debt cycle, a kind of financial Groundhog Day where countries borrow, spend, inflate, panic, and then default, wash, rinse, repeat. Not because they're stupid, though some are, but because they're human. And humans, we suck at moderation. Here's the magic trick. Debt lets people live beyond their means temporarily. One man's spending is another's income. Credit makes us all feel richer. So when politicians are told, hey, we could juice the economy with a little more borrowing, they respond like toddlers in a candy store with no parents in sight. But debt isn't income. It's a time bomb with a smiley face sticker. The machine starts simple. Interest rates drop. Borrowing becomes cheaper. Everyone celebrates. Home prices soar. The stock market pops bottles. Politicians get re-elected. It's party time. But here's what no one wants to admit. All that prosperity is fake. You didn't earn the money. You borrowed it from your future self. And future you? He's about to default on his car loan, lose his job, and cry into a bowl of expired ramen. Dalio's not giving you a theory here. He's laying out a historical autopsy. The same thing that happened to Rome, Spain, the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and, soon, the US. It always starts with easy money and ends in blood. The details change, the math doesn't. Take today. Since Trump stepped back into office in January 2025, the headlines have been divided between booming economy and approaching collapse. The White House boasts job growth and wage increases, but meanwhile, ADP reports the lowest private sector job gains in over 2 years. Why? Because reality has a funny way of crashing the party. Trump's team says disposable income is rising. But have you checked your grocery bill? Tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada are pushing prices up faster than Musk's blood pressure. And while Wall Street claps for a 4% wage boost, Main Street is quietly maxing out its credit cards to afford eggs. Debt doesn't care about your politics. It doesn't care whether it's Musk or Biden or Trump signing the stimulus check. Debt is math. And once that math doesn't work anymore, the whole system implodes. Dalio lays it bare. The short-term debt cycle is about 6 years on average. It's the boom and bust we all recognize. Stimulus, inflation, interest rate hikes, contraction, repeat. But the long-term debt cycle, that's where the real carnage lives. It builds over 50 to 100 years until debt piles so high that no amount of printing, borrowing, or lying can cover it up. You either restructure, default, or devalue the currency. Usually, all three. And if you think this isn't relevant because the government can just print money, you've already lost. That's how you accelerate collapse. Printing doesn't fix the problem. It hides it, briefly, while making the consequences even worse. Dalio compares the system to a perpetual motion machine where everything interacts with everything else. Government policy, private debt, central bank actions. But don't let the elegant metaphors fool you. This isn't art, it's surgery, and we're bleeding out on the table. And guess what? The people who should be fixing this mess, they're the ones breaking it. Central banks want to look like heroes, so they keep rates low and buy government debt like it's Black Friday. Politicians hand out stimulus checks like candy at a parade, and voters keep rewarding the madness because nobody wants to be the adult in the room. Meanwhile, the people getting rich, they already bought their lifeboats. You're still arguing on Reddit about who should pay off student loans while the Titanic hits its third iceberg this week. So where does this all go? Eventually, the trust breaks. That's when the system flips, currency collapses, markets implode, people panic, governments overreact, and a new cycle begins. But here's the catch. The new cycle is never better for the average person. It always starts with pain. If you're still clinging to the fantasy that this time is different, you haven't been paying attention, or maybe you just like being lied to. Key takeaway, debt is not prosperity, it's a drug. And America, we're overdosing in real time while arguing over the playlist in the ambulance. Favorite quote, imagine having the ability to create money. Who wouldn't be tempted to do a lot of that? Those who can always are. That creates the big debt cycle. Economic equations, when numbers predict national downfall. Let's talk about math, because nothing shuts down denial like numbers. You can dodge opinions, blame the media, point fingers at the other party, cry about immigrants, or blame TikTok for rotting society's brain. But you can't argue with a calculator. Ray Dalio, who's basically the Gordon Ramsay of macroeconomics, brings the kitchen heat with spreadsheets instead of spatulas. And what he's cooking? A recipe for collapse, marinated in denial and seasoned with willful ignorance. In case no one told you, the US economy is being run like a teenager with a stolen credit card, and we're out here buying flat screens and blaming China for the bill. Dalio shows us the hard truth. The same mathematical patterns have predicted economic failure again and again. It's like a horror movie where the audience is screaming, "Don't go into the basement," and policymakers kick the door open while lighting a cigar with borrowed cash. It all boils down to simple equations, really. As of 2025, we're seeing it in real time. Debt grows, interest grows, revenue, not so much. The result? Your government owes more than it earns and hopes you don't notice because it's too busy tweeting about border walls or electric trucks. Right now, the US central government's debt-to-revenue ratio is over 500%. That's like making $50,000 a year while owing $250,000 on 12 credit cards. And your idea of fixing it is applying for a 13th card with an interest rate high enough to qualify as economic suicide. And here's where Dalio's magic comes in. He breaks this madness down into cold, brutal formulas. One formula basically says, if your growth rate is less than your interest rate and your debt is huge, you're screwed. That's not a political argument. That's math. You could vote for a ham sandwich and this rule would still apply. So what's the fix? Lower interest rates? We'd need to slash them to 1%, according to Dalio's models. Problem is, current rates are sitting at 4.5% and inflation's being pushed by new Trump-era tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada. So don't hold your breath. Raise taxes? Sure, let's see how that flies with voters already choking on grocery bills and 10-year-olds paying for lunch with Venmo. Or we could cut spending, just 12% across the board, which in political terms means, watch me lose the next election. What about more inflation? That could work, if you want to quietly rob people of their purchasing power while pretending nothing's wrong. But that game's got a limit, and it's fast approaching. This is where things get dark. Dalio introduces what he calls the archetypical sequence. Sounds fancy, but it's just a historical pattern we've repeated 1,000 times because we're too arrogant to study it. First, debt builds. Everyone's happy. Then debt gets too big. Panic starts. The government responds by printing money or cutting rates. It works, temporarily. Then inflation rises. Trust breaks down. People dump currency. The crisis explodes. Does this sound familiar? Since January 2025, we've seen it unfolding. The White House posts glowing job numbers, 139,000 jobs added, yay. Meanwhile, ADP reports only 37,000 real jobs. That's like getting a report card with A's that your mom clearly wrote herself. Meanwhile, tariffs are quietly kneecapping the economy. Inflation is creeping in. Consumer confidence is crashing harder than a Dogecoin investor, and yet the government keeps borrowing like there's no tomorrow. Because if they stop, the entire illusion falls apart. Dalio's insight? We're stuck in a self-reinforcing doom loop. More debt requires more borrowing. More borrowing drives higher interest payments. Higher interest payments reduce government income, requiring, you guessed it, more debt. That's not a policy. That's a Ponzi scheme in a red, white, and blue suit. At some point, the investors who buy US debt, China, Japan, even your pension fund, wake up and say, nah, I'm good. That's when trust collapses. And trust, as Dalio says, is everything. You don't need to run out of money to go broke. You just need people to believe you might. And here's the real kicker. Most of our debt is in a currency we print. That sounds like an advantage until the people holding that currency realize it's monopoly money. Then we either default outright or quietly kill the value of the dollar through inflation. Either way, you pay, either as a taxpayer, a worker, or a consumer. Usually all three. You think the dollar is untouchable? So did the British with the pound. So did the Dutch before them. So did the Spanish. Every empire thinks it's different. Every empire is wrong. And don't kid yourself. Your government knows this is happening. They just hope it doesn't fall apart on their watch. That's why the White House is celebrating GDP while the average American is financing groceries with Klarna. Dalio's message is crystal clear. If you know what to watch, the math is screaming at you. The big crash isn't coming, it's already here. You're just living through the slow motion part. Key takeaway: debt is a slow burning fire. The equations don't lie. And when math starts warning you louder than your political party does, it's time to panic, or at least pay attention. Favorite quote: the more unhealthy financial conditions that exist, the greater the probability of a debt and currency crisis. Private greed, public consequences, the early stages of collapse. You know what's worse than a government that lies? A public that wants to be lied to. The average citizen doesn't want the truth about debt, inflation, or collapsing credit systems. They want lower gas prices, a hot job market, and politicians who tell bedtime stories with trillion-dollar budgets. It's Disneyland for adults, until the roller coaster flies off the rails and crashes into your pension. This is where Dalio turns the knife. The private sector doesn't just stumble into a crisis. It dances into one, champagne in hand. Banks, corporations, and investors load up on cheap credit like frat boys at an open bar. Why? Because no one wants to be the guy who says, maybe this is too much risk. That guy doesn't get the corner office. That guy doesn't get re-elected. That guy gets fired. So the private sector takes on massive debt. But here's the twist. When it blows up, because it always blows up, the government doesn't let it die. No, it grabs the mop, wipes up the mess with your future tax dollars, and tells you it's stabilizing the system. Stabilizing? That's what they call it when the bartender cuts you off because your tab is now a national security risk. Dalio's analysis shows that the earliest stage of crisis always starts here. Private sector debt starts to balloon. The government, feeling the pressure, borrows more to bail everyone out. And when that doesn't work, guess who they call? The central bank, the financial equivalent of duct tape on a leaky dam. Stage 1, the private sector gets drunk on debt. Stage 2, the government joins the party. Stage 3, investors realize this isn't a party, it's a Ponzi scheme. They stop buying government debt, interest rates skyrocket, borrowing gets more expensive, and now the government is caught in a squeeze. It either slashes spending and risks riots, or prints more money and risks inflation. So what do? They choose both. Half measures that satisfy no one and fix nothing. It's like trying to pay off a loan shark with monopoly money while apologizing profusely. No one's buying it. And if you think this isn't happening right now, as of mid-2025, think again. We're watching the same dominoes fall. Consumer confidence is tanking. Hiring is slowing. Inflation from tariffs is squeezing the middle class until it breaks. Behind the scenes, the government is shoveling cash into failing systems just to keep appearances up. Wall Street sees the smoke. They just don't want to admit the building's already on fire. And that brings us to the next betrayal, the central bank. When interest rates are already near zero and debt is still too expensive to service, the central bank steps in like a magician. Only this trick is old. Print more money, buy more bonds, lower rates, inflate away the pain. But here's what they won't tell you. Printing money doesn't make the debt go away. It just shifts the pain from the government's balance sheet to yours. When your dollar buys less, your savings evaporate, your rent goes up, and your dreams of retirement die quietly in a cardboard box behind a Dollar Tree. Dalio lays it out. Every time the private sector collapses, the government takes on its debt. Every time the government can't handle it, the central bank monetizes that debt. Every time that happens, the value of your currency erodes like a sandcastle in a hurricane. This isn't a theoretical exercise. This is the 2008 crisis on steroids, and now it's going global. Europe, Japan, China, they're all running the same playbook. Borrow, bail out, print, repeat. Even now, in the Trump 2.0 administration, the signs are everywhere. The Fed is caught between inflation and recession. The president wants low rates to juice growth, but inflation won't let them. Meanwhile, policy chaos, from random tariffs to Musk's public fallout with government contracts, makes it impossible to plan anything more than 6 months ahead. And while you're distracted by social media beefs between billionaires and politicians, your economy is quietly being auctioned off one treasury bond at a time. But don't worry, the next stage is worse. Because once the central bank goes too far, once the money printing becomes chronic, the trust dies. And when trust dies, so does the currency. This is where you find out how fragile the system really is. When the Fed's balance sheet starts looking like a junkyard and the dollar starts acting like a meme coin, it's game over. You want to know how countries go broke? This is it. Not with a bang, but with a shrug, a bailout, and a spreadsheet full of fake prosperity. Key takeaway: when the private sector takes on too much risk, the government bails them out and passes the bill to the central bank, which prints money and ruins your savings. That's not recovery, that's slow motion collapse. Favorite quote: the central government gets into financial trouble when its finances are squeezed by debt and debt service expenses that limit its ability to spend on what is essential. From crisis to equilibrium, the aftermath of financial turmoil. People think the worst is over when the crisis fades. No, the crash isn't the end, it's just the scene change. What follows isn't peace, it's purgatory, and if you're not paying attention, you'll mistake the silence for safety. Dalio doesn't sugarcoat it. After the big meltdown, economies don't magically recover. They crawl, bruised, limping, teeth knocked out, eyes swollen from the beating they just took from their own stupidity. You don't bounce back from a debt collapse, you stagger forward, hoping creditors forget what you owe them. The first requirement for any kind of bounce is this: the debt-to-income ratio must fall to a point where it's no longer suicidal to borrow money. That means either the income has to rise, or the debt has to get chopped in half. Guess which one's easier? Spoiler, neither is fun, but slicing the debt is the first step out of hell. This is the part of the story where lenders become paranoid, and rightly so. After watching the system break like cheap IKEA furniture, nobody's exactly lining up to hand out loans. And that's why central governments and central banks have to pretend they're responsible adults now. They tighten belts, raise real interest rates, maybe link their currencies back to something real: gold, a basket of commodities, or a believable narrative. But let's get real. Does that actually happen anymore? As of mid-2025, the Federal Reserve and Washington are playing tug-of-war with reality. On one end, you've got the screaming political machine shouting, "Cut rates, print more money, boost the economy." On the other end, inflation, the debt ceiling, collapsing confidence. It's an economic MMA match with your retirement account caught in the chokehold. Right now, they're desperately trying to pretend we're in a new normal, a so-called equilibrium. You hear that word on CNBC, and it sounds comforting, like someone turned the chaos off. But in reality, it's code for "we're broke, but we're keeping the lights on by selling the furniture." This new cycle Dalio talks about, it starts not with growth, but with a psychological shift. People stop dreaming. They downsize, they hoard cash, they grow tomatoes in their backyards and learn how to fix their own plumbing. It's a weird, uncomfortable detox from a decades-long addiction to easy money and reckless optimism. And here's where it gets deep. Dalio says this isn't just a money problem, it's an order problem. Let me say that again, louder for the people in the back. It's not just about money, it's about the entire structure of how nations run themselves. Monetary order, political order, geopolitical order, all of it breaks down at once, like a three-legged chair giving out during Thanksgiving dinner. You don't just get a new debt cycle, you get a new world. We've seen this before. In 1945, the world hit reset after the most destructive war in human history. Before that, the Great Depression, followed by a reshuffling of the global deck. Today, we're watching the same patterns emerge again, except this time we've got nuclear weapons, digital currencies, and billionaires live streaming their psychotic breakdowns on social media. Dalio lays out 5 forces reshaping everything: debt, internal conflict, geopolitical chaos, natural disasters, and human innovation. Mix those 5 together, and you get what he calls the overall big cycle. It's the economic and political equivalent of a hurricane made of fire, ice, and stupidity. And make no mistake, we are deep in this cycle right now. Since Trump's re-election in 2025, we've seen a schizophrenic economy. The White House shouts about record job growth and GDP highs, but at the same time, ADP is reporting private job creation slower than a turtle on Xanax. Consumer confidence is crashing, tariffs are back with a vengeance, suffocating international trade, and inflation, it's not going anywhere. Not when Trump's new round of import taxes is jacking up the price of everything from avocados to automotive parts. But hey, the stock market's up, right? That's cute. That's what happens when you pump billions of dollars into the system and pray nobody notices that the real economy looks like a hollowed out mall in Ohio. Here's the raw truth. When the debt crisis fades, all you've done is kick the can into a brick wall. The next cycle is always lurking, and if you haven't fixed the structural issues, how governments spend, how central banks operate, how power is distributed, you're just setting yourself up for the next collapse. The new equilibrium, as Dalio defines it, isn't peace, it's a momentary standoff, a fragile balance between exhausted creditors, desperate debtors, and governments who hope the curtain doesn't fall before their next term ends. It's the illusion of stability before the next chaos. Key takeaway: recoveries aren't returns to glory, they're resets of expectations. You don't go back to normal. You redefine what normal means, and you do it while standing on the ashes of the old world order. Favorite quote: big cycles go from one order, i.e., one system of operating, to the next one. Big cycles end when these orders break down, usually in a big crisis. Historical echoes, lessons from past economic failures. There's an old saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. But we're not just rhyming here. We're on track to rap battle ourselves into another collapse. Because every time a country gets rich, arrogant, and bloated with debt, it forgets how it got there. Until reality throat punches it back to humility. That's the story of every economic superpower in history, and spoiler alert, America's starting to sound a lot like an overconfident empire that's forgotten it's mortal. From 1865 to 1945, it was like watching the same play over and over again with different actors. It began with the US Civil War, brother against brother, blue versus grey, and most importantly, debt skyrocketing like Dogecoin in 2021. The federal debt shot from 2% to 40% of GDP, and surprise, America defaulted on gold. Yes, Uncle Sam pulled the old bait and switch, printed greenbacks with monopoly money logic, and watched inflation punch up to 80% in 1865. Because when you have more debt than common sense, you lie, print, and pray. But the real kicker? It worked. Kind of. After the dust settled, the US entered the second industrial revolution. Railroads crisscrossed the nation, oil gushed, steel soared, and tycoons like Rockefeller and Carnegie built empires. But don't romanticize it, because the party was debt-fueled, speculative, and riddled with inequality. A bubble wrapped in steel and oil, and as always, bubbles pop. Sound familiar? It should. Because from 1945 onward, we've been riding the same damn Ferris wheel of boom and bust. Post-World War II, America became the world's financial daddy. Bretton Woods, the dollar as reserve currency, global dominance. And what did we do? We took the same self-sabotaging road paved by the British Empire, the Dutch, even the Chinese dynasties. Spend, borrow, inflate, repeat. Every decade since 1945 has been a masterclass in economic whiplash. The 50s had rebuilding. The 70s had inflation that made your paycheck worthless before you got home. The 80s and 90s had deregulation and credit booms. Then came 2008, where the world learned that housing markets don't always go up. Banks got bailed out, Main Street got sold out, and central banks went full Dr. Frankenstein with quantitative easing. Now, in the wake of Trump's re-election in 2025 and Musk's fallout with the MAGA elite, we're smack in the middle of a different kind of debt crisis. Sure, some headlines brag about job growth and low unemployment, but peel back the PR and you'll see a decaying foundation. ADP's dismal 37,000 job report in May 2025, rising tariffs, recession-level consumer confidence, and the Fed boxed in by too much debt and too little leverage. We're drinking from a poisoned chalice and calling it champagne. And that's the lesson Dalio wants to tattoo across your economic frontal lobe. When governments can't raise taxes without riots and can't cut spending without collapsing the system, they reach for the printer. Money printer, go brrrr, until inflation does too, until trust collapses, until you can't sell debt fast enough to plug the holes in your budget, until you realize you're not too big to fail, you're too stupid to survive. Dalio doesn't just give you a history lesson, he gives you a warning label. Every great nation has a cycle: rise, peak, decay, denial, collapse, and reset. He calls it the big debt cycle. But let's be blunt, it's the you did this to yourself cycle. And if you're still clapping for short-term GDP gains while ignoring structural rot, you're the economic version of a smoker lighting up after a lung transplant. Key takeaway: every time we forget how fragile wealth is, we rewrite the same tragedy. The actors change, but the arrogance doesn't. Favorite quote: during times when there is too much debt relative to the quantity of money that is needed to service debts, the need to either increase the amount of money that exists and or cut the amount of debt there is leads governments to break their promises. And if you think that can't happen here, just remember, they used to say that about Rome. The American Experiment, a case study in debt dynamics. There's a special kind of delusion at the heart of modern economics, and no country has worn it quite like a tailored suit the way the US and Japan have. Two titans, two experiments, two slow-motion implosions dressed up as policy successes. If you ever wanted a masterclass in how not to manage debt, or better yet, how to pretend your debt isn't a problem while making it worse, here it is, served with the smug satisfaction of central bankers who think printing money is the same thing as creating value. Welcome to the American and Japanese debt cycles, where denial meets delusion and fiscal stupidity is elevated to a geopolitical art form. Start with the US, the debt-fueled frat boy of global finance. Since 1945, the US has been riding the longest debt bender in economic history. And it's not like they're hiding it. No, they're proud of it. The debt to GDP ratio has skyrocketed like a Tesla stock on a Reddit thread, driven by military spending, entitlement programs, and the pathological refusal to raise taxes or cut spending. Every time there's a bump in the road, like the 2008 financial crisis, or COVID, or the latest AI-powered productivity illusion, the government just borrows more. And the central bank? It steps in with its magical money printer like a financial fairy godmother, whispering quantitative easing like it's some kind of economic pixie dust. Let's not forget, as of June 2025, under the reincarnated Trump administration, America is once again trying to convince the world that it's both the richest and the most persecuted nation simultaneously. We're told the economy is booming. Jobs up, wages up, GDP up. Meanwhile, the private sector added a pathetic 37,000 jobs in May, the lowest in 2 years. Consumer confidence is in freefall. Households are holding off on major purchases, and new tariffs on imports are gut-punching budgets across the country. But hey, who needs consumer sentiment when you've got vibes and stock buybacks, right? Now let's pivot to Japan, the patient zero of zombie economics. Dalio lays it bare. Japan was a perfect candidate for what he calls a beautiful deleveraging. They had the tools, they had the autonomy, they even had the internal creditor structure, and they still blew it. For 2 decades post-1990, Japan did everything wrong. No debt restructuring, no meaningful cost-cutting, no aggressive monetization when it mattered. Instead, they dragged their debt like a corpse through a desert, letting banks rot into zombie institutions and hoping that economic growth would someday return like an estranged lover. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Only by 2013 did Japan start to monetize their debt meaningfully. But by then, the damage had calcified. Deflation had dug in. Wages stagnated. The Bank of Japan became the buyer of last resort, hoovering up government bonds while pretending that negative interest rates and currency depreciation were part of a brilliant long-term strategy. In reality, it was an elaborate con, a way to delay the reckoning by taxing savers and kicking the fiscal can down a road that's rapidly disintegrating. Dalio's genius lies in pulling the curtain back. He shows how both countries, for all their economic size and institutional muscle, have become trapped in their own ideological inertia. In the US, debt is freedom. In Japan, debt is order. But in both cases, the real outcome is decline wrapped in policy jargon. Their cycles mirror each other: private sector bubbles, government bailouts, central bank intervention, rinse and repeat, and always a refusal to deal with the structural problems at the heart of their debt addiction. And here's where the comparison really stings. Japan has at least had the decency to internalize its debt. Most of it is owned domestically, which makes the slow unraveling more containable. The US, not so much. As of 2025, foreign ownership of US debt remains a critical vulnerability, especially in an environment where global trust in American governance is plummeting faster than the yen did during Japan's own crisis. Add to that Trump's renewed tariffs and the Fed's inability to lower rates without triggering inflation, and you've got a fiscal time bomb just waiting for a spark. We're watching two economies trying to outdelay reality. The US thinks it can outgrow its debt, Japan thinks it can outweight it, but both are wrong, because at the end of the day, debt doesn't disappear, it doesn't forgive, it accumulates, and when enough of it piles up, it crushes, first quietly, then all at once. Key takeaway: avoidance is not strategy. Debt doesn't care about your political spin, your monetary gymnastics, or your GDP optimism. It only cares whether you can pay it back, and when both America and Japan hit that wall, no amount of currency manipulation or central bank alchemy will save them. Favorite quote: the Japanese government's handling of its debt problem from 1990 until 2013 exemplified exactly what not to do. No, seriously, frame it, hang it above the Fed's door. Welcome to the slow collapse. It's well dressed, it's highly managed, and it's lying through its teeth. The Dragon's Dilemma, China's financial tightrope. What China has managed to do over the past 40 years would be considered an economic miracle if miracles came with IOUs the size of Mount Everest. Let's be clear, China didn't walk into modernity. It sprinted, barefoot, through capitalism's minefield, carrying a backpack full of communist ideology and a calculator set to overheat. It went from Maoist poverty to debt-driven prosperity, like a Ferrari going from 0 to 60, fast, flashy, and probably unsafe after mile 100. Let's rewind. The modern Chinese economic experiment began when Deng Xiaoping cracked open the doors of communist orthodoxy in 1978 and let in the sweet, intoxicating fumes of free markets. This wasn't a total ideological makeover. It was more like slapping a Gucci belt on a Mao suit. Call it socialism with Chinese characteristics, but make no mistake, it was debt-fueled capitalism wearing red lipstick. By the early 2000s, China had become the factory of the world. Cheap labor, iron-fisted control over unions, because obviously, and an obsessive focus on GDP figures turned the country into a juggernaut of exports. And with all that money pouring in, they started lending it out like candy at a Halloween party. Who is at the front of the line? That's right, the US, funding its consumer addiction with Chinese debt like a junkie swiping a credit card for their next fix. But here's where the trapdoor swings open. You can't inflate debt forever without something, anything, cracking. By the 2010s, local governments in China, real estate developers, and zombie corporations were all swimming in debt deeper than the Mariana Trench. And instead of letting the market flush the toxins, the central government doubled down. Bailouts, shadow banks, and off-the-books liabilities became business as usual. It's like cleaning up a bar fight by handing out more liquor. Then came 2021. Pop. That sound you heard? It wasn't a champagne cork, it was the bubble bursting. The property sector, long a sacred cow in China's growth model, started to buckle. Evergrande and a cavalcade of other walking debt bombs missed payments, and for the first time in decades, the Chinese miracle looked mortal. And how did Beijing respond? The way any control-obsessed regime does when things get dicey, they tightened the screws. Private sector billionaires got kneecapped in public, tech companies were tamed, and policy shifted from reformist exuberance to something that smells a lot like economic nationalism, wrapped in good old-fashioned autocracy. Meanwhile, the five big forces, Dalio's lens for understanding geopolitical and economic instability, came crashing in like a poorly timed sequel. Debt? Check. Internal political strife? Check. International conflict, particularly with the US? Oh hell yes. Climate disasters and pandemics. Welcome to the 2020s. Technology rivalry with the West? You bet your semiconductors. If you're not hearing the ominous cello in the background yet, you're not paying attention. As of June 2025, these tensions have only escalated. The second Trump administration has brought back tariffs like it's 2018 all over again. Imports from China, Canada, and Mexico are all slapped with new taxes. Inflation, it's peeking through the blinds again. Consumer confidence, falling like Chinese GDP projections. One day, you read headlines about booming job growth. The next, private sector hiring has slowed to a crawl. This is not a stable economic environment. It's a seesaw strapped to a rocket. And in the middle of all this, China, trying to balance debt management with global dominance, internal control with economic growth, and innovation with ideological purity. They want to have it all: AI supremacy, climate leadership, geopolitical influence, and a debt system that doesn't implode under its own weight. But you can't have infinite growth in a finite system. Sooner or later, someone's going to get burned. And here's the kicker. The renminbi still isn't a globally dominant reserve currency. So all that internal debt, it's manageable until the market decides it's not. That's the quiet fragility beneath the roaring bravado. Chinese policymakers may have the tools to engineer a beautiful deleveraging, but will they use them? Or will they, like Japan in the 1990s, kick the can until the streets are lined with cans? This is no longer just an economic story. It's a geopolitical narrative wrapped in monetary policy, covered in debt charts, and sprinkled with existential dread. It's the Cold War with spreadsheets, a game of chicken played on a fiscal cliff. And the real test isn't whether China can avoid collapse. It's whether they can navigate this minefield without pulling everyone else in with them. You want to understand the future? Keep one eye on the bond markets and the other on the Taiwan Strait. Key takeaway: China's economic ascent is a masterpiece of planning and propaganda, but underneath the polished facade is a debt bomb ticking in rhythm with the five big forces. Ignore the warning signs at your own peril. Favorite quote: China became extremely productive to the degree that it swamped the world with attractively priced items, earned a ton of money, and lent a ton of money to Americans. I'm still trying to work out who got the better deal. Future shock, scenarios that could redefine economies. You think the future is unknowable, that it's some abstract fog rolling in with no shape or smell, just waiting to surprise us? No, the future is not unknowable. It's ignored, willfully, repeatedly, by people in charge who would rather tweet about patriotism than read a damn budget report. Welcome to the fire-breathing mess of what happens when economic illiteracy meets political cowardice in a back alley, and the nation pays the price. Let's not pretend like the stakes aren't high. The global financial system is sprinting on a treadmill, greased with debt and denial, and the cord has already started fraying. As of the date, since Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, the economy has served up a delicious platter of contradictions. On one side, job growth and rising wages are being trumpeted as a win by the administration. 139,000 jobs added in May, real disposable income climbing. Great headlines, but then you flip the card and the dark roast of economic reality slaps you in the face. Only 37,000 private sector jobs, lowest in 2 years, consumer confidence tanking. That's not a win, that's a warning siren with a broken mute button. And now, just to crank up the madness, we're talking about tariffs. Again, New levies on Canada, Mexico, and China. Sure, if your economic strategy is let's play inflation roulette and hope we don't blow our kneecaps off, then congrats, we're playing to win. Because those tariffs, they're hitting wallets harder than a drunk boxer in a glass factory. Consumer goods are more expensive, inflation's getting cozy again, and the Fed's hands are tied like a hostage in a B movie. But let's not stop there. The book gives us 2 chapters on future scenarios and policy recommendations and puts them in a headlock until they tap out economic hope. Let's translate that mess into a wake-up call. If you're expecting gentle tweaks to fix this fiscal disaster, you've clearly never seen what happens when a government runs out of runway and tries to flap its arms and fly. You want options? Here are your solutions. Raise taxes, cut spending, slash interest rates, or, if you're really bold, try doing all 3 at once without tanking the entire economy. The book calls this the 3% 3-part plan. Sounds neat, right? Like a budget diet. Just trim 3% of GDP and everything's cool. Except here's the catch. If Trump's 2017 tax cuts are extended, and yes, he's promised that, then you're not looking at a 3% trim. You're looking at 4.5%. That's like telling someone to lose 5 pounds and then handing them a cheesecake. Try harder. The book's proposal is straightforward. Agree on the size of the necessary budget fix, and if the squabbling toddlers in Congress can't come to terms, implement a fallback. A boring but effective plan that equally cuts all cuttable spending and hikes all hikeable taxes. No games, no drama. Just arithmetic with consequences. But do you think that's going to happen? Do you think politicians who can't agree on the color of the sky are suddenly going to unite over math? Of course not. So this fallback plan, it's like duct tape for a leaky dam. It won't hold forever, but it's better than letting the valley flood. Let's get into the nightmare fuel. If rates go up, which, spoiler alert, they might, government borrowing costs explode. That's not hyperbole. That's math. Debt spirals. Interest eats the budget. And if nobody wants to buy that debt, then we're screwed. You're looking at a literal death spiral. Rising rates, shrinking demand, and suddenly Uncle Sam is pawning off the family silver to keep the lights on. And don't forget the wild card. War, pandemics, climate chaos. These aren't edge cases. These are likely events. If one or more hits while we're already teetering, forget recession, we're talking systemic breakdown. You want Medicare? Too bad. Pensions? LOL. Infrastructure? What's that? Now, there's also a soft, naive whisper in all this. A hope that somehow AI and productivity miracles will save us. Maybe. If Silicon Valley stops inventing apps that rate your dog's cuteness and starts building fiscal management bots. Until then, AI is just a smarter calculator watching us light our balance sheets on fire. The book concludes with a hard truth. We've seen this movie before, and we always pretend it's a surprise ending, but it's not. Debt cycles are predictable, policy options are known. The outcomes? They depend on courage, competence, and cooperation, and right now, we're batting 0 for 3. Key takeaway: hope is not a strategy. Policy delay is policy failure. Waiting for a miracle is a decision to collapse in slow motion. Favorite quote: "He who lives by the crystal ball is destined to eat ground glass." Let's just hope we still have teeth left when it happens. Navigating the storm: strategies for economic survival. When people fantasize about the future, they imagine shiny cars, free energy, AI that makes your coffee and complements your haircut. But what they never picture is debt. Because debt isn't sexy, it's boring, it's math. It's that thing you ignore until the repo guy is towing your economic credibility out of the driveway. Yet, here we are again, at the mercy of the exact monster we've created. Welcome to the grown-up horror movie. One in which the script has already been written in the past and we still manage to mess up the ending. Today, we peel back the policy packaged, data sanitized daydream and look into what comes after the screaming starts. First, the reality. Governments don't fix debt cycles. They survive them like a drunk stumbling through a burning house, just barely. And when it comes to future scenarios, Ray Dalio's work doesn't provide comfort. It hands you a flashlight and shows you all the skeletons we've been stuffing in the financial closet. The problem is, the flashlight is powered by central banks, the batteries are already dying, and the closet, oh, it's bigger than you think. In this part of the book, we get speculative, but in that deeply unnerving way where speculation feels more like spoiler alerts from a dystopian documentary. Dalio lays out a menu of future scenarios that range from bad to hope you enjoy canned beans and blackout poetry. What makes it worse? Policymakers are either clueless, compromised, or catastrophically late. The projections offered aren't just warnings, they're indictments. Want to stabilize debt-to-income ratios in the USA? Great. Just raise taxes, slash spending, and cut interest rates, all at the same time. In other words, do everything politically impossible, economically painful, and socially explosive simultaneously, like fixing a jet engine mid-flight while it's on fire, and you're the one who lit the match. The rub is that every lever of policy, interest rates, taxation, spending, moves another piece on the Rubik's Cube of catastrophe. Touch one, and the others spin out of control. Dalio shows how even moderate adjustments can send shockwaves through the economy. Want to raise taxes? Good luck when consumer spending is already on a ventilator. Cut spending? Sure, just be prepared for riots when you defund the programs keeping the economy from collapsing like a Jenga tower in an earthquake. And no, new technologies won't save us. This isn't science fiction. AI, biotech, quantum computing, yes, they'll be revolutionary, but only if the rest of the house isn't on fire. Historically, every boom in innovation, railroads, electricity, internet was kneecapped when combined with debt explosions, inequality, and global instability. Productivity gains are real, but they get lost when the other four horsemen of the economic apocalypse are already galloping. Unsustainable debt, political fragmentation, geopolitical conflict, and natural disasters. As of June 2025, the signs are already glowing red. Some data paints a rosy picture. 139,000 jobs added in May, rising wages, low unemployment, but that's the surface. Peel it back and you find ADP's report. Only 37,000 private sector jobs, the lowest in 2 years. That's not growth. That's a sugar high. Meanwhile, consumer confidence is crumbling. Tariffs slapped on imports from China, Mexico, and Canada are inflating prices, squeezing wallets, and suffocating any chance the Fed has to lower interest rates without risking currency devaluation. Businesses are frozen, not investing, not hiring, just bracing for impact. And as of today, that impact is coming. Dalio suggests one possible way out, a 3% three-part solution involving moderate cuts, moderate tax hikes, and modest interest rate changes. Sounds great, except this isn't SimCity. In the real world, Congress can't even agree on lunch, let alone radical fiscal reform. The odds of all three policy levers being pulled in just the right way, slightly lower than winning the lottery during an alien invasion. And let's not forget the wild card, global cooperation. The book is brutally honest. Don't count on it. Right now, nations are viewing each other not as partners, but as threats. Polarization isn't just domestic, it's planetary. And when every nation acts in self-interest, collective collapse becomes not just possible, but probable. So where does that leave you? If you're not worried, you should be. If you are worried, good. Worry sharpens the mind. The only thing worse than panic is complacency, and this moment, right now, demands clarity, not wishful thinking, because every debt cycle ends the same way, with a reckoning. What you do before, that determines whether you end up prepared or buried. Key takeaway. The future isn't written in stone, but if we follow historical patterns, economic policy inertia, and current geopolitical fractures, the outcome is disturbingly predictable. Technology might soften the blow, but it won't cancel gravity. The only way out is through disciplined, painful, and likely unpopular economic reforms, before crisis forces our hand. Favorite quote, "If you're not worried, you need to worry, and if you're worried, you don't need to worry." The final reckoning, understanding the endgame of debt. The end of the book is not a gentle farewell. It's not some academic kiss on the forehead whispering, "Sleep tight, the experts will take it from here." It's a punch to the face followed by a cold bucket of reality. Because after nearly 400 pages of laying out how countries go broke, Dalio makes it excruciatingly clear. If you're still asking what now, the answer is terrifyingly simple. Now, we pay the price. The final reckoning isn't theoretical. It's what happens when decades of fiscal negligence catch up with you, and there's no next quarter, no next election, no next stimulus check to kick the can. It's when trust dies, when the system loses credibility, and when the people who told you everything was under control are suddenly nowhere to be found, probably tweeting from a bunker or hiding behind some Harvard honorary degree. Speaking of Harvard, let's talk about how even that sacred Ivy League cow isn't immune from the political meat grinder anymore. As of June 2025, Trump's administration has declared war on institutional elitism, with Harvard caught in the crosshairs for alleged bias against conservative candidates and mismanagement of federal grant money. It's part of a wider campaign to erode public trust in elite institutions, ironically, the very ones needed to navigate economic catastrophe. And it's working. The intellectual class is being demonized, judges are overturning executive orders on tariffs, and the rule of law is becoming just another political football. This is not a stable country. It's not a stable economy. It's a debt-ridden circus with 330 million people trying to pretend everything's fine while the tent's on fire. In the book's final pages, Dalio doesn't give you new models. He gives you clarity. Cold, clear, heartless clarity. When governments reach the end of their rope, when all the spending, printing, and taxing can't keep the machine running, they pivot, not to sanity, to control. Think capital controls, price fixing, asset freezes, authoritarian emergency measures that make 2020 look like summer camp. Think rationing, think confiscation, think digital currencies with expiration dates and surveillance built in. It's not just about economics anymore, it's about survival, fiscal, social, and political. You can feel it already. As of today, inflation isn't just rising, it's warping behavior. People are spending faster, saving less, hoarding tangibles. Gold's up, crypto's volatile, and the dollar's starting to feel like that cousin who used to be cool, but now only calls when they need money. And while the Fed says it's data dependent, what it really means is, we're out of ideas. This is why Dalio's final call to action isn't about governments, it's about you. If you're waiting for Washington to save you, stop. Start saving yourself. Diversify your assets. Don't put your entire faith in one currency, one system, one country. Pay attention to cycles, not headlines, because the headlines are bought, but history is honest. And that's the whole damn point. This book wasn't written to scare you, it was written to wake you up. Debt is not just a number, it's a symptom of decline, of arrogance, of denial. Every empire dies the same way, by borrowing time they don't have at a cost they can't afford, to maintain a lifestyle they didn't earn. You don't fix that with optimism, you fix it with action. Key takeaway, the end isn't coming, it's already here. We are living in the aftermath of choices made decades ago. The only question left is whether you prepare or pretend. Favorite quote, the only way to avoid a painful end to a long-term debt cycle is to manage it wisely before it becomes a crisis, and very few do. If you've made it this far, the real question isn't, will we survive the next collapse? It's, will we deserve to? Conclusion. Let's be real for a second. You've just walked through the economic autopsy report of global superpowers with Ray Dalio as your brutally honest coroner. And if you were paying attention, like really paying attention, you already know the truth. This isn't about countries going broke. It's about people going blind. Blind to the cycles, blind to the data, blind to the same mistakes that have been made over and over again for centuries by arrogant empires who thought this time is different. Newsflash. It's never different. It's just your turn. Dalio didn't write this book to give you comfort. He wrote it to slap you across the face with reality, to drag you out of your own economic fantasy and force you to stare at the long-term debt cycle like it's a flaming car crash on the freeway of history, because that's exactly what it is. America, on a ledge. China, tiptoeing a high wire strung between ambition and collapse. Japan, A zombie that keeps printing money and hoping nobody notices, and Europe just trying not to implode between espresso breaks. Since Trump took office again in 2025, we've seen what a debt-addicted, policy-chaotic, tariff-happy government looks like when it runs out of accountability and still tries to flex. Judges are blocking presidential moves. The markets are split like a bipolar mood swing. Inflation's rising again. Tariffs are strangling trade, and elites are too busy fighting over Harvard admission quotas to realize the roof is on fire. This isn't politics, this is economics. And when you ignore math, math doesn't care. It still wins. Ray Dalio's masterpiece shows us, with data, history, and painful precision, that the fall of nations is not dramatic. It's boring. It's bureaucratic. It's made of small, stupid choices by people who refuse to tell the truth because the truth is politically inconvenient. The truth is, we're not prepared. And pretending we are is like rearranging deck chairs on a ship that's already halfway underwater. So now what? Don't wait for permission to wake up. Don't wait for someone else to fix it. Don't expect governments, markets, or central banks to save you. Learn the cycle. Recognize the signs. Build resilience. Start with understanding. Buy the book. Seriously, this isn't just a book. It's a survival guide disguised as macroeconomic analysis. Get it, annotate it, rip it apart, make it your blueprint. Because history repeats for the ignorant and rewards those who read the manual. So if you're done being lied to, if you're done watching your financial future get hijacked by politicians, pundits, and passive stupidity, if you're ready to face the ugly, undeniable, and liberating truth, then you're not just a listener. You're a fighter, a thinker, a builder. And this was just your wake-up call. Smash the like button if your brain is still intact. Drop a comment with the dumbest economic policy you've seen lately. Let's roast it together. And go get the damn book. Seriously. Don't be the person who waits until collapse to figure out how it happened. Because the cycle doesn't care if you're prepared, but you should. See you in the next breakdown. Assuming there's still a system left to break.